Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. I hope you're all having a wonderful Christmas. So today is Christmas Day, and as those of you who have been following my channel for a long time will know, as per tradition, every year on Christmas, I review a Christmas themed video game. For example, in previous years I reviewed games such as the Polar Express, Die Hard trilogy, and even Batman Arkham Origins, which I reviewed last year. It's something that I really enjoy doing since Christmas is my personal favourite time of the year. And for me this season, and video games go hand in hand. On the build up to this day, I had a particular Christmas themed video game that I wanted to play and review, and I fully intended to do so. Unfortunately, as it happens, that particular game that I had in mind proved to be a little bit more expensive and difficult to get my hands on than I initially expected. As a result of this, the particular review I wanted to make today had to be postponed since I basically ran out of time, and wasn't able to get the game in time to review it for Christmas, which is a bit of a bummer. Nevertheless, I decided that rather than cancel my Christmas special altogether, I might as well go ahead and find another Christmas themed video game to look at instead, since I really wanted to make a Christmas special for the channel, regardless of which game happened to be the subject. I had a few games in mind for a replacement, and was fully prepared to use them for a review. However, one thing led to another, and December turned out to be a bit of a hectic month for me. I ran into issues at work and stuff like that took up a lot of my time, and if truth be told, I ended up completely forgetting my Christmas special, leaving it all to the last minute to get everything sorted for it. Due to several distractions and issues I was dealing with, I wasn't able to get my hands on any of the Christmas themed video games I had in mind for the video. Not without spending a fortune, so I came pretty close to scrapping this year's Christmas special altogether. Then I had an idea. If I'm making a Christmas special for the channel, it doesn't necessarily need to be a Christmas game. I mean, it could just be a game with a Christmassy theme or aesthetic, such as snow and winter as well as animals and stuff that are usually associated with Christmas. After racking my brains, browsing my vast retro video game collection, trying to come up with a game that I think would be suitable for the video, I decided that it would be a pretty cool idea, no pun intended, to review the Cool Borders series on PS1, since I really like those games and always had a bit of a soft spot for them. Unfortunately, at the time of this recording, I only have access to 2 of those games, and if I'm going to review the series, I want to do it properly, and do a full retrospective on the whole thing, which will, for obvious reasons, take more time to do than I currently have time to dedicate to it. So that idea got postponed as well. As those of you who have been following the channel recently will know, I actually did a full playthrough earlier this month for a wintry themed indie platformer that just came out a few days before, named Frozen Gauntlet. And as a last resort, I actually considered reviewing that game for my Christmas special. However, I decided against that idea, since that game is literally less than 20 minutes long if you know how to play it, genuinely one of the shortest games I've ever played, so it seemed kinda pointless to make a review for it. I think the playthrough I did, which took me just over 15 minutes, was enough in terms of content for that game. So yeah, long story short, my December schedule for this channel, as well as a lot of other things in my life recently, was a complete disaster. Then I had a bit of a realisation. There was one game, a game with snow and a wintry aesthetic that had been on my to-do list over the years to check out. A game that induces an incredible amount of nostalgia in me for several reasons, which I'll talk about in the video. And a game that long before I ever made this channel, I had ironically enough considered playing as a Christmas tradition. That game, as you can tell by the title, is the subject of this video, Yetisports Deluxe, released in 2004, a bizarre late release for the PS1. Now, if you're a kid under the age of 20, then chances are you've probably never heard of Yetisports. However, if you're a 90s kid like I am, and you went to school during the mid-2000s, then I'd be willing to bet that you have some experience with this series. If not firsthand, then you probably knew several people that did. Back in my school days, one of the most boring, tedious, and mind-numbingly awful classes we had to endure was IT class. If you're anything like me, then having to sit in front of a computer, surrounded by other kids, writing up evaluations, learning about spreadsheets, and faffing about with Excel, with the only small glimmer of excitement or creativity being occasionally opening Microsoft Paint for some reason, was one of the worst things you had to put up with in school. It's just so boring. There was something seriously unhealthy about IT class. It just drained the absolute life out of me and bored me to sleep. However, me being a somewhat rebellious kid with a bit of a passion for video games, I was able to take the horrendous experience of school IT class and make it into some of the happiest and most nostalgic memories of my entire life. And the answer to that was Flash games. At a certain point during my early high school days, and I forget exactly when, I figured out that while the teacher wasn't looking and was addressing the rest of the class and stuff like that, I could basically do whatever I wanted on the computer without anybody bothering me, as long as I wasn't directly in the teacher's line of sight. Nobody bothered me at all. It didn't really matter whether or not the work got done, because it's IT class, it just gets deleted at the end of the week anyway, so who cares? So I realised that I and some of my classmates in school could browse the internet in search of ways to entertain ourselves, discovering that there were hundreds upon hundreds, maybe even thousands, of dodgy websites that existed purely to host these low-budget browser games, many of which were derivatives of popular video games from the time. And some of these games, as I'm sure my fellow 90s and early 2000s kids will agree, were absolutely incredible. It turned one of the most boring and mind-numbing experiences of my childhood into an absolute blast, and one that I'm still nostalgic about to this day. If you remember games like the Staggy series, Stick RPG, Madness, Boxhead, The Skull Kid, Line Rider, and so many other classics that made up the vast majority of my IT classes, then you remember just how fun these classes could end up being. What was awesome about it too is that every single time the school IT technician would track down and block one of these websites, more would be discovered almost instantly by students, and they were never able to keep up with us. I ended up loving these Flash games so much that for a time I even started to spend my lunch breaks in the library, while all the nerds were in there studying, doing homework and all that boring crap. My dumbass was on the computer playing Flash games. Man, I love Flash games, and I'll always remember how they got me through school. I could of course sit here all day talking about Flash games and the impact they had on me back in the day, but for the purpose of this video we're going to be talking about a particular series of Flash games that was so popular, so notorious and so fun, as well as iconic, let's not forget that it even got a major console release on the original PlayStation, no less, my personal favourite console, which was way better and way more fun than it had any right to be, and that is Yetisports. Yetisports for me is that one series of Flash games that over the years I was never able to get out of my head. There was just something about it that always fascinated me. It's basically a collection of winter themed mini games that involve a Yeti using penguins for sport. There were many versions of these released online over the years, including one which was particularly bloody and violent. That version of the game isn't in the one we're going to be looking at today, but I thought I'd bring it up anyway. And the overall absurdity and bizarre nature of these games made them a pretty recognisable brand. In the early 2000s, the brand got so recognisable that a full-price game was actually made and released for the original PlayStation, and also ported to PC. For the purpose of this video and for my own nostalgia, I was able to track down and acquire the PS1 version, and that's of course the version we're going to be looking at today.
Let me fly.
So Yetisports Deluxe, as I mentioned before, was released in 2004, so very late on in the PS1's lifespan, and was developed and ported by similar software, and published by Joe Wood Productions. Obviously with the game coming out so late in that console generation, and essentially being a bunch of old Flash games, it got absolutely slaughtered by critics, being considered by mainstream critics of the time to be one of the worst games ever released on the PS1. And despite the popularity of the Flash games at the time, the game itself went completely into obscurity shortly after its release, and barely ever got mentioned again. The game is pretty rare to find nowadays, but unlike a lot of rare and hard to find games, when it does show up from time to time, it doesn't tend to be that expensive. I got my copy of the game pretty cheap, and I have to say that in spite of its obvious limitations, I actually really enjoyed it and found it very interesting. So the game is essentially a collection of 4 Yetisports minigames, bizarrely 2 of them being slight variations of each other, which for obvious reasons got the game a lot of criticism on its release. The objective of these minigames is to earn points. You do this by interacting with penguins, which basically play the role of balls or darts. You can play these minigames either yourself or in multiplayer, and try to beat each other's high scores, which of course makes this a perfect candidate for a party game. and I could genuinely see this being a blast to play with a group of friends, and if nothing else a pretty decent novelty to make them curious. In fact, I just recently played through it with my friend, and the pair of us were in absolute stitches for a while, laughing hysterically at the absolute absurdity of the whole thing. Also, it can actually get pretty competitive. Of course, when a player finishes their turn, they can type in their name and it will be added to the leaderboard at the end of the round. Each player's high score will also be recorded, and the scores can be viewed at any time in the game's menu for comparison's sake. As far as the actual mini-games themselves, the first one you get is called Super Pingu Throw, which is a slightly more advanced and upgraded version of the original Yetisports Pingu Throw, which was the most popular of the classic Flash games. The goal of this game is simple: hit the penguin as hard as you can with a mallet, as it willingly dives into your line of fire, practically begging you to send it through the air, and try to hit it as far as you can. Obviously, the further you manage to make the penguin go, the higher your score will be. When playing for the first time, it can actually be quite difficult to get the timing right on your swings, since with this being an old Flash game originally designed for keyboards on an old PC, the hitboxes take a little bit of getting used to. But I'd say it's optimised for the PS1 well enough. At first it can actually be quite tricky to hit the penguin, and of course if you fail to hit it then you don't get any points. It's a relatively simple minigame, but despite its simplicity, it's actually surprisingly addictive to play. I guarantee once you get used to it, you will spend a lot, and I do mean a lot longer than you think you will, trying to beat your high score. It's also a little bit more complex than just hitting the penguin hard. You'll notice in the corner of the screen there's a little flag, and this shows you the direction and the speed of the wind. You will need to use the wind to time your swings better, and of course this can help you to get a higher score. Getting the correct combination of height and speed can really help in this regard. Also, sometimes with this minigame, as well as the next one, strange occurrences will happen, such as an orca jumping up and getting involved, or even a penguin hitting the ground in such a way where he rolls up into a snowball, making him roll further. These little anomalies of course do their bit to add a little bit of variety to the game and make it less repetitive. So yeah, that pretty much sums up the first minigame. Again, it's a very simple game. You hit the penguin with your mallet and try to make it go as far as possible. It's definitely the easiest of the 4 minigames and the least frustrating. The second minigame you get is called Ice Bear Attack. This is basically the same idea as Super Pingu Throw, except the rules are slightly different. This time, instead of simply hitting the penguin, trying to make it go as far as possible, you now have to be a little bit more precise. There will be a long line of polar bears that are willing to be knocked over like bowling pins. Hit the penguin just right and it will land on some of their heads. The more polar bear heads it lands on, the further it will travel and the more points you will get. If you fail to hit any polar bear heads at all, then your hit will be invalid and you won't get any points at all, getting a game over. If nothing else, this minigame is pretty fun just to see the polar bears get practically KO'd one after the other. It's done in such a satirical and comical fashion that it's almost hard to describe.
Great!
However, as much fun as I had with this one, it could be quite frustrating, since as I mentioned before, if you miss all the bears, then you get a game over and are back to square one. But it's not as if it takes a long time to get through it or anything like that, so it's not really that big a deal. So yeah, that pretty much sums up the Ice Bear Attack. It's essentially a reskinned and repurposed version of the Super Pingu Throw, and it is what it is. I enjoyed it for what it was. The next 2 mini-games deviate from this formula however, and are more to do with accuracy and timing. The first of these 2 is called Super Orca Slap, again a slightly upgraded and more refined version of the original Orca Slap Flash game. And the goal with this is to essentially use the penguins as darts. You will have a target board etched onto a nearby iceberg, and an orca sitting in front of you, as well as a long line of penguins waiting for their turn to be darts. Each penguin will step up one at a time, and dive right into the orca's tail. The orca will then slap them up in the air as the name suggests, and you will be tasked with throwing a snowball at them. By hitting the penguin with the snowball, you will launch it at the target areas on the board. Each target area will gain you a specific number of points. Accumulate these by hitting as many targets as you can to increase your high score. Unlike the Pingu Throw minigames, it can actually be very tricky to hit the penguins here, since the timing always seems to be a little bit random, and this can of course lead to a lot of trial and error. But of course, like any game, practice means perfect. And just like the previous minigames, it can actually be surprisingly addictive, and you will be constantly chasing your next high score, as well as trying to outdo your friends. Of course, if you hit the penguin away from the target areas, such as the water, or if you fail to hit it entirely, then you don't get any points, and you wasted a shot. If you're able to get a bullseye, however, then you unlock a slot machine. This opens up a whole new side minigame, kind of a minigame within a minigame, where you can try to match 3 slots to unlock more points, though this is very tricky.
Ready?
Again, just like the previous minigames, the animations here, as well as the slapstick humour, really made me laugh hysterically. I particularly like when the penguins hit the wall, you can still see their legs kicking. That was pretty funny. This minigame is definitely a lot more challenging than the Pingu Throw ones, since there isn't much room for error when trying to hit the penguin, but it's just as fun and addictive as them, as well as hilarious to try out. The fourth and final minigame you get is simply called Pingu Dart. This is essentially the same concept as Super Orca Slap, except instead of the target areas, you get an actual dartboard this time. Once again, you wait for the orca to slap the penguin up in the air with its tail, and you throw a snowball at it, trying to hit as many of the targets as you can, which once again gain you points. Again, just like the last game, you can gain bonus points by hitting a bullseye, which is a little bit trickier to do this time, but not impossible. And just like the last game, it's quite tricky to even hit the penguin in the first place, never mind score a decent amount of points or a bullseye. Again, there's not really a whole lot different to the previous minigame, so I don't really have a whole lot else to say about it. It is what it is, but I enjoyed it, I had fun with it for what it was. So that's the 4 minigames, and that's basically it. I'm not kidding. This game has 4 minigames, which are derived from classic Flash games that you'd play in school when skiving during IT class. And someone thought it would be a good idea to make a full price game for it and release it on a major console. Well past that console's peak days. You can certainly tell why it got panned back in the day, and why it barely gets talked about anymore. I mean, never mind that, it barely got talked about on release. So with all that in mind, it's really hard to recommend this game, because there just isn't really a whole lot of content involved with it. I'm not about to pretend that this game is some misunderstood masterpiece, or the best kept secret in gaming or anything like that, and I'm certainly not going to exaggerate. But you know what I will say, and this is the absolute truth, I don't care about any of that. Because despite the limitations of this game, and with all the criticisms previously mentioned, I still really enjoyed the game. Seriously, I had an absolute blast playing through it, and trying to beat my high score. And as I mentioned before, it's surprisingly addictive. And for me, the same can't be said for a lot of these kinds of games. Derivatives like this generally aren't games I go for nowadays, since I'm usually more into platformers, RPGs, action-adventure games, and things of that nature. But I won't deny, this game made me laugh my head off the whole way through, and I could see it being the kind of game you bring out at a party to faff about on with friends, a great casual gaming experience. Another thing I personally like about the game, and this is more of a meta-analysis than anything else, is how it really reminds me of those previously mentioned school memories. It's like for me this game kinda represents freedom from the boredom of being stuck somewhere I don't want to be, doing work that I don't want to do, and as far as I'm concerned that's the very definition of escapism. I've had kind of a stressful time at work lately, and right now as I make this video I'm enjoying my days off over Christmas, and this game has kind of been a blessing to me over the past few days, and I think I'll always have a soft spot for it for that very reason. And as I alluded to earlier, this could turn out to be a new Christmas tradition for me personally. I'm almost certain I'll play it again next Christmas. Of course I'm not recommending anybody go out their way to buy this game, and I'm not about to pretend it's brilliant, but if you like flash games, party games, or derivatives of any kind, or if you're just curious about it, look this game up, I'm sure you'll be able to find it somewhere. It's one of them games that while rare and somewhat difficult to find, it's not particularly expensive when it does show up. I was able to get mine for about £7, so relatively cheap for a rare game like this. And despite my criticisms, I enjoyed every minute of it. I give Yetisports Deluxe a generous 5 out of 10, an interesting curiosity if nothing else. Thanks for watching guys, I really enjoyed checking this game out, and it basically salvaged my Christmas special this year, which was so close to being scrapped. Before I end the video, I figured I would give a quick update on the future of the channel, and what content, if any, you can expect for 2025. Due to how hectic December was for me, there were several videos I wasn't able to get out on time. Last week, as some of you may know, I intended to have my Rayman 2 walkthrough up, but that'll have to wait till January, as well as my Shadow of the Colossus walkthrough that I keep saying I'm gonna do, but keep putting off for one reason or another. I've also agreed to continue the Harry Potter series at some point. I figured since I did walkthroughs for the first 3, I may as well do the next one for completion's sake. As far as reviews and fully edited videos of this kind, it will really have to depend on viewership, since as I've talked about in the past, the lack of views compared to what they used to be sometimes makes it feel like a waste of time and effort. I'm not going to abandon the channel or anything like that, but if my reviews aren't getting views, then I'm not going to be as dedicated to them as I was this year. My Time Splitters series retrospective should be coming in the very early part of the year. That's kind of a passion project for me and a video I've wanted to make for a very long time, so stay tuned for that. Also, some of the games I mentioned earlier, such as the Cool Borders series, high likelihood I review those games at some point next year. So yeah, there'll be plenty of reviews from time to time, but probably not as frequently as there was this year, since with me working a full-time job as well as training, I'll need to be a little bit more sparing with YouTube than I have been in the past. All that being said, thanks for watching guys. I really enjoyed playing and reviewing Yetisports Deluxe, and I of course hope you're all having a wonderful Christmas. Praise be to our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ. Once again, if you could like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.
Ready?